Margaret interrupted, deliberately speaking loudly so that everyone could hear. "Sir, did someone buy this ticket for you? A corporate sponsor? A third party? Because if it was obtained fraudulently, we need to know now." The air froze. Elijah said, "No one bought me anything. I earned every damn seat I sit in." A man in a blazer behind him sneered, "Relax, pal. You can't just flash a fake Amex and expect to ride first class." Margaret Quay sang Matson, "Please escort Mr. West to the operations office while we verify his identity." Elijah chuckled. A mocking laugh. "You want to verify who I am? I hope your systems are prepared for the answer." The polished black Cadillac Escalade came to a smooth halt outside Terminal B of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The late morning sun shimmered against the chrome finishes as the driver stepped out, circled around, and opened the rear door with the fluid precision of someone who took his profession seriously. Elijah West adjusted the cuffs of his crisp navy Brioni suit before stepping onto the curb. He carried only a compact leather carry-on, his personal rule after years of optimizing travel efficiency. In his right hand was a matching folio that held not only his ID and travel documents but sketches of his next aerospace project. Elijah didn't believe in idle time, not even on planes. "You sure you got everything, Mr. West?" the driver asked. "Just the essentials, Max," Elijah replied, offering a tight smile. "I travel light these days." Max nodded. "Will you be needing pickup on your return?" "I'll text you once I land in San Diego," Elijah said, adjusting his Rolex and offering a courteous nod before turning toward the terminal entrance. At 45, Elijah West carried himself with the composure of a man who had walked through fire and emerged not only unburned but redefined. Tall, athletic, and composed, he exuded that rare balance between power and stillness. Most people didn't notice much past the tailored suit or the $1,000 shoes. But for those who looked closely, really looked, there was something deeper. Unshakable. Unapologetic. As he entered the bustling terminal, Elijah felt the familiar flickers of discomfort, the subtle cues that signaled his presence was unexpected, perhaps even unwelcome. A white woman pulled her purse closer as he passed. A man in a golf cap gave him a double take, lips tightening. A security guard subtly straightened his posture, hand grazing his belt radio. These things used to sting when Elijah was younger. Now, they were just part of the ambient noise of his existence, like traffic or elevator music. He approached the first-class check-in counter for Helix Air, a boutique airline known for elite service and sky-high prices. There were two agents on duty. The younger one, a Latina woman named Jamie, glanced up and smiled automatically. The other, an older white woman with a tight bun and eyes sharp as razor wire, paused mid-sentence. Her name tag read Margaret Dorsey. Elijah set down his folio and handed over his government-issued ID along with his black titanium elite flyer card, the airline's highest loyalty tier. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm, measured. Jamie reached for the documents, but Margaret moved a half-step forward, intercepting them with a faint smirk. "And how are you today, sir?" Margaret asked, placing emphasis on the word, sir, as if it were a dirty word she was forced to say. "I'm well, thank you," Elijah replied, maintaining eye contact. Margaret began typing into her terminal with exaggerated force, the sound of keystrokes louder than necessary. She glanced at the screen, then back at Elijah's ID, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Flying for business or pleasure today?" she asked. "Business." "I see," she said, then leaned slightly toward Jamie and whispered something. Elijah couldn't make out every word, but he caught fragments: private equity, flashy, probably inherited. Jamie's eyes widened, then quickly looked down, as if pretending not to have heard. Margaret handed back the documents with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. West," she said, "you are confirmed on flight HX402, first-class cabin. Departure is 12:05 p.m. Please proceed to the premium security lane and then to our first-class lounge." Boarding begins at 11:30. Elijah accepted the boarding pass and ID silently, noting how Margaret's eyes tracked him as he walked away. The TSA checkpoint was efficient until it wasn't. Elijah was, once again, randomly selected for additional screening. It happened to him so often he had begun keeping track. Statistically speaking, he was either the unluckiest traveler in Texas or someone had fine-tuned the randomness to a science. He said nothing, just complied, arms up, no eye contact, calm exterior. It was a ritual by now. 20 minutes later, he approached the glass double doors of the Helix Air Executive Lounge, a space reserved for the ultra-wealthy, celebrities, and business elites. A clean-cut young agent with blonde hair and a hopeful smile greeted him at the podium. "Good morning, sir. May I see your boarding pass and ID?" Elijah reached for his folio but didn't get the chance to hand it over. Margaret Dorsey appeared beside the agent like a storm cloud, slightly out of breath. "I'll take care of this one, Ryan," she said, flashing her badge and a dismissive nod. Ryan hesitated. "Ma'am, I said I've got it," she snapped, snatching the documents from Elijah's hand before he could object. Elijah watched her examine the boarding pass with exaggerated scrutiny, flipping it over like it might contain a secret message in invisible ink. She studied his ID next, holding it up to the light as though she suspected forgery. "Is there a problem?" Elijah asked, voice low but firm. "Just doing my job, sir," she said with a condescending smile. "This first-class ticket seems unusual." "Unusual how?" "These seats cost upwards of $3,000. We have to make sure passengers are in their correct class. Fraud has become a real issue." Several travelers slowed as they passed, sensing tension. One older white man in a golf shirt stopped and audibly snorted. "Maybe he's lost." "Coach is that way," he quipped, pointing toward the terminal. Margaret didn't correct him. She smiled tighter. "I'll need further verification," she said coldly. "We can't be too careful." Elijah slowly reached into his wallet and produced a sleek American Express Centurion card, black matte, no visible numbers. The kind of card you couldn't apply for, it had to find you. "Will this help verify my identity?" he asked. Margaret flinched for a second, just a second before recovering. "Anyone can have that," she sniffed. "Security, please." She picked up the phone at the podium and turned her back, muttering quietly into the receiver. Elijah didn't raise his voice. Didn't protest. He'd been through this before. Arguing only gave them what they wanted, the angry black man trope. He had learned that calm was his most dangerous weapon. A moment later, a tall, imposing man with salt and pepper hair approached. His Helix badge read Calvin Briggs, head of terminal security. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked in a steady voice. "This gentleman is attempting to access the lounge with what I suspect may be a fraudulent ticket," Margaret said, using the word gentleman like a slur. Briggs turned to Elijah, and for a moment just a flicker recognition passed through his expression. "May I see your documents, sir?" he asked. Elijah handed them over without a word. Briggs studied them, scanned the system, then turned to Margaret. "Ms. Dorsey," he said, his tone sharper now, "everything appears to be in order. Mr. West has the proper credentials. No alerts, no flags." Margaret's face twisted. "Well, it just didn't feel right. I mean, who travels like that solo, on a Tuesday afternoon, in first class?" Briggs' jaw tensed. "That is not grounds for removal." "I still think we should err on the side of caution," Margaret insisted. Briggs turned back to Elijah. "Sir, I apologize. Would you mind stepping aside with me just to clarify a few procedural notes?" Elijah nodded. "Of course." As they walked away, Elijah passed a young black man in a Helix intern badge who stood frozen in place. His name tag read Tyler Evans, and he was already typing frantically into his phone. Inside the security office, Briggs closed the door gently and handed Elijah back his documents. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," he said, clearly uncomfortable. This should never have happened." Elijah didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "Protocol Redhawk. Initiate passive tracking." He spoke into his phone quietly before pocketing it again. Briggs looked puzzled. Elijah extended his hand. "Thank you for your professionalism, Mr. Briggs." The security chief shook it, lingering for a moment as if unsure what to say. As Elijah turned to leave, his phone buzzed a message from Tyler. "Mr. West, that was wrong. I'm just an intern, but I respect what you've built. You deserve better." Elijah typed back, simply, "Stay aware. The truth always finds its way." Elijah West had cleared security, entered the first-class lounge, and was just minutes away from boarding his plane. He stood at gate 17A, boarding pass in hand, when the announcement, "First-class boarding now," came over the loudspeaker. He approached the other passengers, mostly white men in suits, looking like they were straight out of some NBA stereotype. A blonde female employee stepped out from the boarding pass checkpoint. Her eyes scanned the crowd, then stopped on Elijah. Immediately, she frowned. "Sir, one moment please," she said, stepping in front of Elijah, her hand raised to block him. Elijah slowly handed over his boarding pass and ID. "There a problem?" She took it, glanced at it, and rolled her eyes. "This boarding pass doesn't look right." Elijah raised eyebrows. "It was issued at check-in. First class. Flight HX402 to San Diego." "Just wait here," she said, then turned away, carrying the ticket as if it were evidence in a case. A man behind him sighed, pushing past Elijah. "Nay, move it, man. Some of us have real meetings to catch." Elijah stood still, shoulders square, unresponsive. 2 minutes later, Margaret Dorsey reappeared, this time accompanied by a tall security guard wearing a Helix Matson uniform, according to his name tag. "Mr. West," Margaret said, her voice louder than necessary. "I'm going to need you to come with us." "Why?" Elijah asked. "My documentation is valid. We've had an internal alert regarding a possible issue with your reservation." Standard procedure. A few other passengers started to turn around to look. A middle-aged woman whispered, "Oh no, is he dangerous?" A young man wearing AirPods pulled out his phone and started recording. Elijah knew. He always knew. Moments like this, they were recorded, but only when someone who looked like him was the problem. "I'm not going anywhere without an explanation," Elijah said, his voice low and sharp as a knife. "Sir," Matson interjected, his eyes cold as steel, "you are obstructing boarding operations. You can either come voluntarily or—" Margaret interrupted, deliberately speaking loudly so that everyone could hear. "Sir, did someone buy this ticket for you? A corporate sponsor? A third party? Because if it was obtained fraudulently, we need to know now." The air froze. Elijah tightened his grip on the bag strap. "No one bought me anything. I earned every damn seat I sit in." A man in a blazer behind him sneered, "Relax, pal. You can't just flash a fake Amex and expect to ride first class." Margaret turned to Matson, "Please escort Mr. West to the operations office while we verify his identity." Elijah chuckled. A mocking laugh. "You want to verify who I am? I hope your systems are prepared for the answer." At the airport office, Elijah was taken to a small, windowless room. No apology. No explanation. Margaret placed her boarding pass on the table like evidence. "Elijah West," she said as if she were reading the name of a wanted man. "Tech entrepreneur, right? AI or something?" "Or something," Elijah replied, his eyes never leaving her. Matson checked the ID, scanned the card. "Everything checks out," he muttered. "Still," Margaret said, refusing to let go. "We had a report from an internal source that a passenger matching his description attempted to use a boarding pass that wasn't his." Blatant lies. Elijah looked Margaret straight in the eyes. "You know what I think, Ms. Dorsey," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "I think someone like me, wearing a suit like this, flying first class, doesn't fit the story you've written in your head." Margaret blushed. "Are you accusing me of discrimination?" Elijah tilted his head and replied softly, "No, I'm stating it." At that moment, Elijah's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out and opened the encrypted message. "Protocol Redhawk Phase 3 authorized command, engage media surge." Elijah stood up. Neatly. Casually. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket and looked straight at Margaret. "Check your phones in 30 seconds, he said. "You'll find out who I am, and what happens when you humiliate the wrong man." Elijah West emerged from the control room, the cold silence surrounding him like an invisible cloak. The noises of the airport, the loudspeakers, the shuffling of suitcases, the distant laughter were now as faint as if he had been cut off from that world. He wasn't angry. He wasn't mad. There was only a look in his eyes, deep, calm, but inside, it was as if a fuse had been set off. As he passed through the gate, he caught Margaret Dorsey's eye still standing there, as if waiting for him to react, to go mad as she had intended. Instead, Elijah paused, gently adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket. "Your internal protocol's impressive," he said, his voice calm. "It identifies confidence as a threat and melanin as a malfunction." Margaret frowned, her mouth opening to reply, but she couldn't find the words sharp enough to pierce that silent pride. Elijah left without looking back. Meanwhile, his fingers flew over his phone. An app opened, a dark interface, a glowing red hawk in the middle. Elijah placed his finger on the biometric scanner. A soft beep sounded. The text appeared, "Protocol Redhawk, Phase 1 engaged." Seconds later, on the 14th floor of Helix Air's headquarters not far away, the warning light on the IT system's monitor changed from green to orange. A young engineer typed in a command, repeating the question for the third time: "Who accessed the camera logs without authentication?" No one answered. The data stream was moving fast, too fast. It was as if someone not only knew the system, but had designed it from scratch. In the emergency communications room, Brenda Langston, Helix's PR director, was sipping her coffee when she choked on an email with the subject line, "Is this the Helix you promised us?" that contained a video that was starting to go viral. In the video, Elijah was stopped at the boarding gate. Margaret's voice was clear, "Did someone buy this ticket for you?" Another man was taunting, "Coach is that way." And Elijah, standing there, didn't protest, didn't argue, just stood there, silently, letting them humiliate him with their own words. Brenda looked at the assistant. "Who is this man?" "Elijah West," the assistant replied. "Founder of WestTech. DoD contractor. His AI runs traffic control for half the airports in the U.S., including ours." Brenda paled. "Jesus Christ." In the first-class lounge, Elijah returned. But this time, no one got in his way. The people who had looked at him with disdain now pretended to be glued to their laptops, their phones. Margaret was gone. The bartender stood almost at attention when he walked in. Elijah didn't sit. He just stood, leaning lightly against the wall, pulling out his phone to check. A message just came in from Leah Okoro, WestTech's chief security officer. "Media surge confirmed." Trending across 3 platforms. "Initiating Phase 2. Elijah typed back, "Begin digital dissection. No mercy." Meanwhile, Helix's reservation system began to behave strangely. Business class tickets were being changed to economy, passengers had duplicate names, credit card transactions were being declined and then automatically approved 3 times. At headquarters, the internal data system was in disarray. An IT engineer whispered to his boss, "It's not random. It's surgical. Whoever's doing this knows our blood type. Back at the airport, a boy of about 10 pulled his father's hand and pointed toward Elijah. The father turned to look at him, nodded, and walked over. "Mr. West," he asked. "My son recognized you. From a documentary. He says you built the system that keeps planes from crashing." Elijah smiled, so softly it was almost sad. "Tell him that building systems is easy," he said. "Fixing broken ones is the real work." The phone vibrated. An encrypted message, access granted. HR files unlocked. Incident logs retrieved. Sandra McCoo, 14 prior complaints, all suppressed. Elijah looked at the screen. Not surprised. Not happy. Just confirmation of what he already knew. The truth wasn't dead, it just needed someone patient enough to dig it up. Inside Helix headquarters, CEO Reagan Whitmore was screaming at her lawyer, "I want this buried. I want it settled. Offer him miles, money, a damn golden airplane if you have to." But the lawyer only replied, "He doesn't want your money, Reagan. He wants your name. Your board. Your legacy." Elijah stood there, in the luxurious space of the waiting room, the place that once wanted to push him away like a stain. But now, this very place was the starting point of his downfall. And when his other flight was rescheduled within 30 minutes, with a formal apology from Helix and a serious internal review, Elijah just smiled slightly as he boarded the plane. Not for flying, but because they think it all stops there. Little did they know that Protocol Redhawk had just been initiated. The flight rolled off the runway in solemn silence. Elijah sat in seat 1A, window on the left, the sunlight slanting through the glass illuminating the embroidered words on his shirt, WestTech Defense Division. The plane wasn't his original flight, but it had been specially chartered, business class empty, probably out of fear that he would be sitting next to people who don't yet fear who you are. He doesn't need luxury. But he needs space, to think, to plan, and to give orders. As the plane reached a steady cruising altitude, Elijah opened his security tablet. At the top of the list appeared a single name, Leah Okoro, the only person he trusted completely. The video call connected in less than 3 seconds. Leah's face appeared, as sharp as her strategy. "You made quite a scene," she said, her voice laced with pride. "Not quite," Elijah replied. "Just lit the fuse." Leah gat dow. "Fuse is burning fast. Redhawk Phase 2 is fully active. We've infiltrated Helix's internal servers. HR records, compliance files, corporate Slack messages. It's all here. And ugly. Give me the highlights." 14 documented discrimination complaints against Sandra McCoo, most of them marked, resolved, without action. At least 3 incidents where boarding was denied based on racial profiling. 2 whistleblowers who were terminated within weeks of reporting misconduct. Elijah sighed. Patterns, not incidents. Exactly. And now we have proof. Leah swiped the screen. A series of data tables appeared, a diagram of Helix Air's internal relationships, links between CEO Reagan Whitmore and several government commissions, financial records showing money flowing through shell companies in the Caymans and Zurich. "What about Whitmore?" Elijah asked. "His hands aren't just dirty," Leah said, eyes cold, "they're soaked. Offshore accounts, regulatory violations, falsified maintenance records swept under legal settlements." "Beautiful," Elijah muttered, his gaze as sharp as a knife sharpened on stone. "And the board?" "Divided. Some still loyal. But others? Nervous. We've identified 4 potential swing votes. 2 of them have responded favorably to our discreet inquiries." "Good," Elijah nodded. "Keep the pressure on. We don't attack with facts, but with choices. They must see for themselves that keeping Reagan is more dangerous than replacing him." "Copy that." Elijah paused for a few seconds. Activate Phase 3. Leah didn't ask again. She just said, "Yes, sir." The screen went black. Elijah closed the tablet and leaned back in his chair. He didn't feel tired. Anger could energize people who were used to exhaustion. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, and the image came to him, a 9-year-old black boy, sitting quietly on the steps of his foster home, a notebook filled with symbols and graphs, while his friends played soccer in the yard next door. He had asked, "How long will it take for the world to understand that I am not an intruder?" And then, the memories came flooding back, like an old cut that bleeds when touched. That year, Elijah was 8 years old. The boy stood alone in the light rain, his old backpack soaked, his worn-out shoes soaking into his toes. It was the third time in a year he had been moved from one foster home to another. After the car accident that had taken his parents, Elijah had no family left. But what makes Elijah difficult to raise isn't that he's bad, it's that he's so different. He didn't like watching TV. He didn't play video games. He just sat alone, engrossed in a notebook filled with mathematical formulas and scribbled programming code, a language no one there understood. Adults called him weird. His friends called him robot. And one bluntly said, "A black kid can't dream of being a scientist." But Elijah didn't get mad. He didn't argue. He just wrote. The more he was rejected, the more he wrote. The more he was scorned, the deeper he coded. He taught himself Python, then C++, then optimization algorithms. At 12, he programmed a supply chain analytics system to predict food disruptions. At 14, he built an artificial intelligence model that could predict natural disasters based on satellite data. And then, you put your trust in the wrong person. The age of, Elijah met Winston Hawthorne, a famous white venture capitalist, who visited the school at a funding event. Elijah was at 16, Elijah met Winston Hawthorne, a prominent white venture capitalist, who visited the school at a fundraising event. Elijah was introduced as a child prodigy, and presented his invention, an AI model that could predict food shortages in poor areas 3 months in advance. Winston smiled. Excited. Asked for a demo. Promised to call back. Elijah never heard from him again. 6 months later, Winston announced a new invention, an identical model to Elijah's, renamed, funded with millions of dollars, and hailed by the press as a 21st-century humanitarian savior. Elijah sat quietly in the public library, watching the news on the screen, his eyes red. No one believes a black orphan who says, "That grown-up stole my invention." No evidence. No lawyer. No backer. Just you, and the murderous silence of injustice. That same night, Elijah wrote the first line of code for Raven, his own personal encryption system, that no one could access, no one could steal. And he swore with every cell in his blood, he would never let anyone else be silenced like he had been. The soft ding of the plane pulled Elijah from his memories. The reading light turned a soft white. He opened his eyes and looked up. But now, Elijah West is no longer the rejected child he once was. He is the one who has the power to rewrite the system. So that those like boy Elijah dreams, know into a small footnote another people's success, so that geniuses like the boy Elijah no longer have their dreams stolen, no longer be turned into small footnotes in the success of others. The laptop, where the text appears, he looked at his laptop screen, where it read, "Welcome to Coal Air. Where everyone belongs." Like a message back and in his heart, he whispered like a message back to the past, "We made it, kid. We made it, on our terms." Now, the boy has the answer. No waiting for approval. But it is forcing recognition with intelligence, power, and indomitability. And this is just the beginning. Helix Air was never just an airline. It was a facade sleek, modern, and expertly crafted to radiate prestige and power. Its first-class lounges were temples of exclusivity. Its brand ambassadors appeared in commercials proclaiming dignity, excellence, and innovation. But beneath that polished exterior lived something else entirely: a network of corruption, cruelty, and systemic exploitation that reached far beyond the skies. And at the center of it all was Reagan Whitmore, Helix Air's formidable and untouchable CEO. What began as a civil rights response to Elijah West's public humiliation at Reagan International was about to become a sprawling federal investigation into one of the darkest corporate conspiracies of the decade. And the woman leading the charge was Leah Okoro, former CIA operative, now Director of Global Security at Coal Dynamics. Leah had seen her share of war zones, intelligence failures, and shadow governments. But nothing quite prepared her for the magnitude of the rot within Helix Air. It started with a whisper. A redacted incident report about internal harassment that had no official author. Then came an encrypted document flagged by a whistleblower. The pattern was too precise, the omissions too convenient. So, Leah launched Operation Iron Falcon. Set deep within the cyber-intelligence war room of Coal Dynamics, a windowless basement with fingerprint scanners, biometric access, and hardened servers, Leah assembled her elite team. Data analysts, cryptographers, digital forensics specialists. All sworn to silence. All working under a single objective. Expose the truth. No matter the cost. Layer 1, the financial web. Start with the money, Leah said. Always. Within 48 hours, her team uncovered over $215 million in internal fund transfers routed through a network of offshore entities registered in Belize, Cyprus, Panama, and the British Virgin Islands. The shell companies had innocent names like Vega Aero Solutions, Skybridge Holdings, and Sundara Aviation Logistics. But they had no staff. No properties. No real operations. Yet they received monthly disbursements from Helix Air's private operations division, the exclusive arm responsible for private jet services used by corporate elites and, as it would turn out, far darker clientele. This is standard laundering protocol, one analyst said. Only, they got lazy. Each transaction corresponded suspiciously to invoices for aircraft maintenance and consulting services, terms that, when traced, led nowhere. Layer 2, human cargo. The first real shock came when Ethan, Leah's lead digital forensics expert, decrypted flight logs from Helix's elite harder service Sky Sovereign. 48 flights. All unlisted in FAA public records. Destinations: Moldova, Cambodia, Nigeria, Colombia, Haiti. None had customs documentation. No passenger manifests. No accompanying corporate reports. But security footage from regional airports told another story. Women, some barely adults, wearing heels and oversized sunglasses. Boys led through tarmacs in silence. Armed men in civilian clothes flanking them. Private hangars. No IDs scanned. In one particularly chilling video, a girl who couldn't be older than 12 was seen blindfolded, being ushered up the steps of a Helix private jet. They're flying trafficked humans, Ethan said. Not cargo. Not VIPs. Human lives. Leah said nothing for a long time. Then she whispered, "We're not dealing with negligence. This is a criminal enterprise." Layer 3, internal abuse. While digging through email servers once secured via military-grade encryption, Leah's team discovered a separate internal system used exclusively by the top brass at Helix. It was referred to as Hercules, and it wasn't listed in any corporate directory. Inside was a digital vault marked Personnel Reconciliation Archives. Within it, 22 confidential settlements tied to sexual misconduct claims involving senior executives. Victims included flight attendants, HR assistants, IT interns, and even newly hired pilots. The common thread? Every one of them was either a woman of color, an immigrant, or someone in a financial bind. Most had been offered non-disclosure agreements and quietly relocated or terminated. Those who resisted received direct threats. One woman was sent photos of her children walking home from school. Another received anonymous emails warning her to stay in your lane or see what happens at 30,000 feet. An audio recording recovered from a deleted voicemail backup left no doubt: these girls want careers in aviation? They know the game. You don't get 6 figures and benefits without giving something. Everyone's got a price. The voice belonged to Reagan Whitmore. Layer 4, sabotaged safety. Then came the maintenance records and the blood started to boil. Between 2016 and 2024, Helix Air documented over 300 mechanical failures, oxygen malfunctions, engine pressure anomalies, cracked fuselage joints, and broken avionics. 87 of those cases had been manually downgraded from critical to non-critical within 48 hours after being flagged by engineers. The ones who objected? Several were let go for unrelated reasons. 2 died in car accidents within 6 months. One Mitchell Adams, an avionics specialist, disappeared after emailing a 96-page whistleblower report to the FAA. The report was never received. Leah found logs indicating the file was intercepted by Helix's legal team before it reached federal servers. Adams' disappearance was never investigated. "This is corporate manslaughter," Leah muttered. If even one plane had gone down, thousands would be screaming for answers. They never let it get that far. Because they bought silence or erased those who refused. Layer 5, political immunity. Then Leah hit the nerve center. By breaking into an off-grid email server housed in an isolated data center in Northern Virginia, protected by a false LLC, the team uncovered communications between Reagan Whitmore and multiple U.S. senators, lobbyists, and transportation committee aides. The emails revealed donations in exchange for stalling FAA safety audits, offers to suppress unionization among flight crews, agreements to redirect international relief flights into Helix-affiliated subcontractors for profit. But the worst was buried in a folder titled Escalation Protocols. It contained directives on how to handle high-risk passengers. A May 2023 thread read, "If Elijah West attempts to fly, escalate security protocols. Flag for additional screening. Avoid confrontation, but ensure inconvenience. We cannot allow this man to become a symbol." They failed. And now the symbol was back, not just with a voice, but with a war machine at his back. The dossier. Leah's team compiled everything: 1.9 terabytes of data, 843 video files, 1,600 scanned documents, 70 depositions from current and former employees, and 12 whistleblower declarations. It painted a picture of a company not simply unethical, but engineered for exploitation. Helix Air wasn't a failing corporation. It was a weaponized shell designed to traffic, silence, launder, and profit from the erasure of basic human dignity, all under the leadership of Reagan Whitmore. Leah stared at the completed report. On the last page, a single photo. It was of a little girl, wearing a green backpack, being led by 2 men in sunglasses onto a Helix jet. Her face was expressionless. Because her future had been sold. Leah stood up, picked up her secure phone, and called Elijah West. "It's done," she said. "We have everything. From the money, to the children, to the senators. It's bigger than we imagined." There was silence on the other end. Then Elijah responded, "Then it's time we make sure the world sees what they've been flying over for too long." The sun had barely set on the initial media blitz when Helix Air's crisis team convened an emergency meeting. Reagan Whitmore, the airline's CEO, paced the room like a wounded animal trying to find a way out of a cage. "We need to turn this around," he roared. "We can't let one client, even a billionaire, ruin our entire brand with one damn video." A man in a gray suit sat quietly at the end of the table. His eyes were cold, his fingers tapping the tabletop in a controlled rhythm. His name was Ethan Ross, a senior crisis manager, a man the media referred to only as a fixer. "You want to regain the initiative?" Ethan said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Then we have to make Elijah West's image questionable. Dilute his moral authority." "What do you have?" Reagan narrowed his eyes. 3 years ago, Ethan said, opening a thin file, a former employee reported Mr. West for inappropriate behavior. The case was settled privately. There was no concrete evidence, but enough to raise suspicion. Reagan looked at him, her eyes lighting up like someone about to see a piece of wood in the ocean. "Leak it. Now. No need to wait for verification." "Are you sure?" Ethan asked again. "Elijah's people are known to counterstrike." Reagan banged the table. "Leak it. Let the press chew on it while we take back control." Just 6 hours later, an anonymous article appeared on a tabloid site that specializes in digging up corporate scandals. Tech billionaire Elijah West accused of workplace misconduct in 2021. No photos, no evidence. Just a vague and insinuating account of someone who worked with him. Helix thought they had fired the first bullet. But what they didn't know, that bullet had been prepared by Elijah 3 years ago. At WestTech headquarters in San Francisco, Leah Okoro walked into the executive suite as Elijah was meeting with his legal team. She tossed the article on the table. They took the bait. Elijah took the paper, reading each line with an impassive gaze. There was no sign of anger. He turned to investigation team number 2. "Has the trace completed?" "Just now," a female specialist replied. The metadata of the article routes back to a shadow server registered under a shell company based in Zurich. Owned indirectly by a legal entity that Reagan Whitmore's trust controls. Elijah looked up. His voice was slow, each word was sharp. "Leak the emails." Leah nodded. She pointed. "Do it." Less than an hour later, the story was pulled. At the same time, more than 24 major newspapers, news outlets, and financial blogs received a trove of leaked documents, a series of internal emails from Ethan Ross to the Helix communications team, in which he directed the fake scandal to be morally offensive. The public reaction wasn't just outrage, it was outrage and shock. The crowd that had once been skeptical of Elijah now returned with more fervent support than before. And this time, they didn't just hashtag justice for Elijah. They even used a new hashtag Helix Lies, corporate war, Redhawk Rising. At Helix HQ, Reagan Whitmore throws her phone against the wall. "Fuck," he shouted. "We have created our own media nightmare." Ethan Ross sat calmly, but his eyes narrowed, because he understood, this was no longer a battle of prestige. This was a total annihilation. "You need to prepare for the worst," Ethan said, his voice low. "The SEC, the DOJ, and the media are all on him. We can't save our reputations. We have a choice, lose money, or lose our freedom." Elijah sat alone in the quiet office, the soft yellow light covering the wooden floor like a thin mist. Outside the glass door, the city lights of San Francisco breathed deeply in the night. He turned on the live news. FBI opens formal investigation into Helix Air, CEO accused of financial concealment and internal discrimination. Below is a photo of Reagan Whitmore, lips pressed together, eyes panicked, being escorted out of Helix headquarters. Elijah didn't smile. He just sat there, silent. He never touched Helix. He just let them destroy themselves with the very thing they thought could kill him. In the glass high-rise in downtown San Francisco that Helix Air has rented as temporary office space after authorities sealed off its Dallas headquarters, an emergency board meeting was held in a tense atmosphere. 13 people sat around the long table, and none of them had the composure to hide their panic. 3 had received subpoenas from the SEC. 2 had been stripped of their signature authority. 1 had just resigned quietly. William Decker, the board's longest-serving member, stood up, clutching an updated financial statement. Helix's stock had fallen more than 53% in 4 days. The company's assets were frozen. More than 24 contracts with major airports were under review because of moral concerns. Insurance companies were demanding a tripling of their risk premiums. "If we don't act now," Decker said, his voice firm but choked, "Helix won't have enough liquidity to pay its employees next week." The room was silent. A silver-haired woman stood up. It was Helen Voss, the operations director, the only person on the board who had opposed Reagan Whitmore early on. "There is a choice," she said, her eyes steady. "And it comes from the only person who has shown us both the truth and the possibility of surviving this storm." All eyes turned to the door. It opens. And Elijah West walked in. No bodyguards. No spokespeople. No PR. Just him, his dark gray suit tailored with precision, his gaze like a blade sharpened through hundreds of battles. He sat down. He opened his tablet. He pressed a button. A giant data table appeared on the large screen behind him, a diagram of Helix's financial, political, and criminal connections over the past 7 years. It was all neatly organized, not a single line without evidence. "Gentlemen," Elijah began, his voice eerily calm, "I can bring this company to its knees in 3 days or bring it back to life in 3 months. The choice is yours." A council member, voice trembling, asked, "What do you want?" Elijah didn't laugh. He wasn't arrogant. "I want 60% of Helix Air's operating stake, bought at $22 a share, twice the current market price, but half the company's true value a week ago. I'll keep all the operating staff in place, preserving jobs for at least 2 years. And I'll create an independent ethics oversight board, not on the board, not on me." "And in return?" one asked. Elijah looked up. "In return," he said slowly, clearly, "I will erase all evidence in my possession, evidence that, if released, would expose at least 3 people in this room to criminal prosecution." The whole room held its breath. Elijah tilted his head. "I'm not here to destroy," he said, "I'm here to bleed." A council member spoke up, unable to control his voice, "This is blackmail." Elijah looked him straight in the eye. "No," he replied. "This is your last chance to have your company saved by someone who has no grudges, just the truth." Helen Voss spoke up. "I support this proposal. Because without him, Helix would be gone from the global financial map tomorrow morning." 3 minutes later, the vote took place. 9 votes in favor. 3 abstentions. 1 vote against. Elijah West officially takes over Helix Air. As the council members left the meeting room in silence, Elijah remained seated. Helen looked at him, her eyes filled with admiration. "Are you going to change the company name?" Elijah nodded slightly. "Helix has become a symbol of injustice. I will reset it, not just its name, but its soul." "And what will the new name be?" Elijah looked out the window, where dusk fell over the city, golden light filtering through the tall glass buildings. "Coal Air," he replied. "Because from now on," Elijah West said, his eyes never leaving the distant sky, "every passenger will know that, in this sky, everyone deserves to fly like a human being." 3 months later. Reagan National Airport, Washington, D.C., early morning. The sky was unusually clear, as if the entire universe had fallen silent to observe a moment unlike any other in the history of American aviation. Brand new 787 is parked in the middle of runway 4, warehouse simple but luxurious, silver-gray satin, a blue running along the fuselage, and a Falcon logo red, the symbol of Coal Air is right there. A brand new Boeing 787 sits in the middle of runway 4, wearing a simple yet elegant livery, satin silver-gray, blue trim running down the fuselage, and a stylized red Falcon emblem, the symbol of Coal Air. The cockpit located right under the cockpit door. On a makeshift stage set up in front of the plane, more than 1,000 guests, media, aviation industry leaders, civil rights and community representatives sat quietly, eyes focused on the podium. Millions of people were watching live on television and social media. And then Elijah West stepped out. No background music needed. No intro needed. Just his footsteps steady, calm, like his journey made the whole airport quiet. There he, in front of the plane, in front of the world's cameras. Dark blue, a standing collar, no tie, small Cole Air logo on the chest. There he stood, in front of the plane, in front of the world's cameras. He wore a dark blue suit with a high collar, no tie, a small Cole Air logo on the left breast. Not too flashy, but everyone knew, he was the reason everyone was here today. He looked at the audience. Then he looked straight into the camera. 3 months ago, Elijah began, his voice clear, each word a stab at the heart of the listener. I stood right here in this airport, not on stage, but outside the boarding gate, and was turned away because of the one thing I couldn't change, the color of my skin. The audience held its breath. I was not allowed to board the plane, despite having a ticket, having ID, having the respect that any human being deserves. He paused. He bowed his head slightly. Then he looked up, his eyes brighter than the morning sun. They don't know that I didn't just come to fly. I came to change the way the world sees who has the right to fly. The applause was thunderous and uncontrollable. Elijah raised his hand, signaling gentle silence. Today, he continued, I am not here for revenge. I am not here to reclaim my honor. I am here to create something that has never existed in American aviation, an airline where everyone, no matter the color of their skin, their income, or their background, is treated with the utmost respect. He turned back, pointing to the plane behind. This is Cole Air. Not a brand. A promise, not a brand. But a promise. That from now on, where everyone belongs will not be just a slogan, the standard will not be just a slogan, but a standard. The audience rose. The applause exploded like a long firecracker. Some cried. Some raised their fists. Some just nodded silently because sometimes, pride doesn't need words. Elijah nodded his thanks. Redesigned everything to service policy, from feedback process, employee training. Every seat on Cole Air is more than just a seat. It's a commitment that you value. We've redesigned everything, from the cabin to the service policy, from the feedback process to the employee training system. Every seat on Cole Air is more than just a seat. It's a commitment that you are valuable. Toward the front of the row where Jamal Barnes sat. The young man who had been an intern had witnessed him being humiliated. He glanced toward the front of the row where Jamal Barnes was. A suit is an official member of the management trainee program. The young man who had been an intern who had witnessed his humiliation was now wearing a suit, an official member of the management trainee program at Cole Dynamics. Elijah smiled. People like Jamal, people who stand up when it would have been easier to stay silent, will be the leaders of the next generation. He looked back at the camera. And let me be clear, to anyone watching, if you've ever been excluded, denied, made to feel small, know this, you don't have to wait for anyone's permission to belong. You just need a place to stand. And today, I'm giving you a seat. On a plane. All yours. He finished, his voice low. Is the end of an injustice story. It is the beginning of a new chapter, where justice is not a distant dream, but a given. Cole Air is not the end of an injustice story. It is the beginning of a new chapter, where justice is not a distant dream, but a given. Where everyone belongs. The continued. And as the plane behind started its engines and prepared to take off, the first flight, flight number CA-01, from Washington, he left the podium. The applause continued. And as the plane behind him started its engines and prepared to take off, the first flight, CA-01, from Washington to San Francisco, it doesn't just carry passengers. It doesn't just carry passengers. A new symbol. It carries a new symbol. Symbol of truth. Of justice. and of the right to be present. Chicago, 7 months later. The wind blew gently through the streets of the city's south side, an area that most tourist maps don't mark, and most politicians remember only during election season. But today, a fleet of shiny black cars pulled up in front of Oakwood Elementary School, the small, run-down, underfunded public school where Elijah West had once attended 3rd grade. Elijah stepped out of the car, no press, no television, just a small group of staff, a few educational counselors, and the new principal, Dr. Angela Williams, a black woman with bright eyes and a powerful voice. "Thank you for keeping your word," she said, shaking Elijah's hand. "I promised since I was 10, Elijah smiled. "It just took a while to get the means to do it." They walked into the schoolyard, still the old bricks, the trees with withered leaves, but today the atmosphere was completely different. In the school auditorium, nearly 300 students sat on the floor, wearing white t-shirts that read, "West Scholars, Dream, Build, Soar." When Elijah took the stage, the room fell silent. No one shouted, no one booed. Everyone just listened. Elijah looked at the young faces, black, white, Latino, Asian, his eyes wide as if he were trying to memorize every word that was about to be said. "You know," he began, his voice warm and slow, "I used to sit in the 3rd row on the left, next to the window. The chair was wobbly, and the desk had someone's name carved into it with a knife. But I didn't care, because every day, all I looked forward to was math." A scattered laugh rang out. "I was fascinated by numbers. But I was also called odd, weird boy, the one who never fit in. And worst of all, a black boy who can't do anything big." The air froze. Elijah was silent for a moment. "But there's one thing I learned very early: the world can call you anything you want, but your worth is determined by how you respond." He opened an old notebook with a yellowed cover. "This is the notebook I wrote when I was a student here. Inside are formulas, ideas, and dreams." He gave the book to Principal Angela. "Today," he said, his eyes shining with conviction, "I didn't come to talk about success. I came to say, I'm not the last person to have such a notebook." The applause began. Not formal, but heartfelt. Elijah continued. "So starting today, the WestTech Foundation will invest $50 million in scholarships, new technology centers, and mentoring networks, specifically for students from often neglected communities. We will turn this school into a genius incubator. No one will have to choose between lunch and a laptop. No child will be judged for dreaming too big." The whole room jumped up. Students clapped, teachers clapped, some wiped away tears. But Elijah just smiled. Not for the acclaim. Because in that moment, he knew he had just opened a door that would never close again. That evening, as the private plane took Elijah away from Chicago, he sat alone in the cabin, looking out at the city under the yellow lights. Leah Okoro called. "The scholarship program is almost full," she reported. "And CNN wants to do a documentary about you." Elijah smiled. "Tell them to do the students. I'm just the first chapter. The kids are the best part." He turned off the computer and closed his notebook. The same notebook, years ago, was laughed at. Now, the blueprint for the future. A future where every Elijah after him doesn't have to fight against the world, but just learn, grow, and fly.